Let's start this morning by asking you a very serious question. And I understand if you don't want to talk about it, or if you're not willing to admit it. But if you are, I'm going to ask this to you. How many of you have ever fallen asleep in church before? I have a few honest people in our congregation, I see. I know some of you were at the midnight Christmas Eve service and aren't quite being forthcoming this morning. But that's okay because it happens a lot. I have a front row seat to watch it. Pastors know who you are. And don't worry, yes, we love you anyway. And I'll say that this is not a new phenomenon. It'd be easy to blame our attention spans in the age of television and Netflix and all that stuff, but really it goes back far, a long time ago. In fact, in the book of Acts in the Bible, there is this great passage that isn't preached very often in church because what happens is Paul, famous figure in the Bible, Paul, is preaching a sermon. Now, I know if Paul came and preached a sermon here at Downey that you all would stay awake for it. But 2,000 years ago, when Paul was preaching a sermon on this particular day, there was this kid named Eutychus. And like so many people do in church from time to time, Eutychus starts falling asleep while Paul is preaching. And Paul goes on and on and on far too long. And Eutychus, who's sitting there kind of leaning in the window trying to listen to Paul, all of a sudden while he's sleeping and Paul goes on and on and on, Eutychus falls out the window from the third floor and they find him dead. Now it's a sad story, but I also think it's kind of a funny story except for the fact that he dies. But I think it's there as kind of this warning for preachers not to go on too long. There's biblical support for that. But more than that, I don't know that that is actually the message. Maybe the problem wasn't that Eutychus was bored to death, but maybe the problem was that the church wasn't breathing life. That there wasn't enough being said to keep Eutychus awake, not just in that moment. The church has a long history of people falling asleep. And that we can joke about and laugh about. But where comedy turns to tragedy isn't so much that people fall asleep in church, but rather that the church itself falls asleep. That is far more tragic than someone falling asleep during the worship service. And no, I'm not giving you permission to do that. You remember the old legend of Rip Van Winkle, authored by the great writer whom our community is named after? And in the story, Rip wanders off into the woods and he falls asleep. When he wakes up from that nap, his beard is all grown out and the tools that he brought with him into the woods have all kind of rusted over. What kind of nap was this? He goes back into the town and figures out that it was no ordinary nap. It wasn't a few minutes or a few hours or even a few days, but Rip Van Winkle had fallen asleep. Anybody remember how long? 20, wow, literary scholars back here. 20 years he had fallen asleep. No one knew who he was anymore. My favorite preacher, William Sloane Coffin, talks about this story. Talks about what we can learn from it. And he haunted me in saying this, that Rip Van Winkle fell asleep And when he woke up, he found himself in the distant future. But if churches don't stay awake, then we may one day discover that we woke up in the past. What is it in our community, in our city, in our world? What is it, Downey Avenue Christian Church? What is it that we are called to wake up to? So many times when I tell people I'm a minister, there's one of two reactions that are possible if I'm out and about around town somewhere. If they have a drink in their hand, they will sheepishly set the drink down. Or, if they're bolder than that, the other reaction is that they'll kind of want to challenge me a little bit. Church? Nobody goes to church anymore. Church is a thing of the past. Don't you know churches are dying? Too many people are ready to put our tombstone out in the parking lot. And I'm not just talking about Downey Avenue Christian Church, but church with a capital C. That our best days are behind us. That we're falling asleep and losing our relevance. But what they don't see are all the ways that churches are so full of life. You can't be in the doors of Downey Avenue Christian Church for more than 10 minutes before you figure that out. God is breathing life in and through this place. And more than that, in and through these people, us together. The church is not ready to put our tombstone out. We're not ready to say R.I.P. But maybe it is time to admit that in some ways we're a bit R.I.P. Van Winkle. That there are things that we fall asleep to. That there are ways that we are called to wake up, to open our eyes more clearly to not only what God's doing in this place, but what God is doing in the world around us. Where are we called to wake up to being part of what God is doing in this world? We are not ready to put our tombstone out. We are not ready to fall asleep. But rather, today is the day, this very morning, today is the day that we are called to wake up. That we are called to awaken to the best possibility of the future that God has in store for each one of us and for all of us together. Today is the day that we are waking up. Waking up to say that the love of God is timeless. It has no end. The love of God is not in the past alone. The love of God is right here in this moment, and the love of God always has its best days ahead. More than that, we are waking up to say that today is the day, this very morning, today is the day that we are waking up to sound the alarm. That we are waking up. Or perhaps in more modern terms, today is the day that we're going to get woke. This morning's scripture says it like this. Ancient words that are just as relevant today. Let us not fall asleep as others do. Somebody was asleep at Christmas Eve on midnight. Some church out there is falling asleep this very morning, but let us not fall asleep. Let us keep awake because we belong to the day. We belong to the light of what God is doing in this world. That is where we belong. Now, what does all of this have to do with worship this morning? What does all this have to do with Downey Avenue Christian Church? What does all this have to do with the beautiful postcard there in your seat or the posters around the building? Awaken the Space. This morning is a vital day in the history of our church. Every Sunday is important. Every Sunday matters. But this day is a vital day in the history of our church. I'm going to be a little bit shorter up here today than usual, not because I'm afraid that you're about to fall asleep, but because in a moment I'm going to defer my time to Donna Marks when she comes up in our mission moment to offer a presentation to us about how our church specifically is being called to wake up in 2020. When you hear it, it will seem like a daunting task. I promise you, it will seem daunting. If it doesn't, then you fell asleep during it. But I can promise you more than that, that how we wake up this year, what side of the bed that we choose to get out on in 2020, how we wake up will forever change the way that this church does ministry. How we awaken ourselves this year will forever change the way that we live out our mission for all our days to come. Some people will say that it can't be done. No doubt. And to that, again, I turn to the words that Susan read to us a moment ago in this morning's scripture. Whether we are awake or whether we're asleep, either way, we live with Christ. Therefore, encourage one another and build up each other as indeed you are doing. Anybody can be a cynic. Anybody can poke holes in what cannot seem possible. But whether we belong to the night or the day, whether we are asleep or awake, this is not our work to do. This is God's work that is about to happen through us. So let us believe in the possible. Let us build up each other as we are called to do as children of the day. Because when we do that, when we start this capital campaign a few moments from now, it's not about taking care of our building. It's about this. Not taking care of our building, but of building one another up. Of maximizing the way that this mission that we have called to live out, maximizing the way that we can do that in the years ahead. We are not just taking care of our building with this capital campaign. We are taking care of the way that we are called to build a welcoming church, and a just community, and a sustainable world. When you hear about this capital campaign, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to fall asleep. Because the torch of God's generosity that we have inherited in this place, from generation to generation, that torch is now ours to bear. And as that torch gets passed from generation to generation, God's hope will always find new ways to breathe, to live, to wake up in each generation, as long as we're willing to do it together. With every single new day of our lives, the sun rises. There's a new dawn. And when that dawn comes, it begs of us to wake up, to get out of bed and to walk more fully into who we can be. We should never be alarmed that God's love is just for one place or one time in the past. But right here on this morning, it is our turn to sound the alarm, to wake up into a new and beautiful and sacred love that God has created for us to share in this time, in this place. So let's wake up. Let's wake up together. Amen.
Good morning. My husband Craig and I have a friend who frequently, and perhaps always, starts his day with the exclamation, "It's a great day to be alive." When I happen to hear it, his sentiment always makes me smile because it is so right on. Every day is a great day to be alive. But today is particularly great. It's a great day for the groundhog, who will likely get 6 more weeks to sleep. It's a great day for a Super Bowl party. And it's a great day to kick off a capital campaign. For those who I don't know, my name is Donna Marks, and I'm chairing the steering committee for the Downey's 2020 Awaken the Space capital campaign. When you came in this morning, you should have found a beautiful, colorful, exciting message posted all over the walls, on the screen, and in your seats that looks like this. This, my friend, is your invitation to be a part of the next step in Downey's journey to live out its mission. The mission we invoke every week, a mission to build a future that is welcoming, just, and sustainable. As you know, this mission statement was developed as part of a process whereby we as a congregation imagined what our future could look like. What we imagined was reflected in this vision statement. As we begin a conversation about conducting a capital campaign to make building improvements, it is appropriate to point out that among other things in this vision statement, we voiced the desire to offer our facilities as sacred space that would breathe life into our mission, specifically mentioning the desire to use our basement space for mission and outreach to the community. In a few minutes, as I share information about the campaign, you will see that that particular aspect of our vision is expressly reflected in the plans. But before I get to those details, I want to draw your attention to another part of our vision statement that is also extremely relevant for this campaign. At the very end of the statement, after we spell out the many things we hope to accomplish with our ministry, in a short section we may have the tendency to even overlook, we acknowledge this: we still have work to do. We will be asked to do more, to sacrifice more, and to embrace the exciting change that is yet to come. Sometimes there will be pain and discomfort, but we welcome that too, safe in the knowledge that we care for each other as we continue to live out our mission. This campaign and the possibilities it can afford represent exactly the work, the sacrifice, and the exciting change that we saw for ourselves even as we created our vision. So let's embrace it all as we embark on the journey to awaken the space. Now for the fun part. What does this journey have in store for us? So I realize that this is a very busy slide with all the circles, but I make no apologies for it, even though I know it may be difficult to read. This slide is busy because it shows the many possible projects we hope to be able to do through the Awaken the Space capital campaign. Moreover, this slide also represents the imaginations of many people. Specifically, it represents the imaginations of those who have served on the campaign steering committee and its various work groups during this planning phase. I would like to thank those who have been involved and ask them to please stand so everyone will be able to see who they are. If you were involved, please stand up. Thank you. Again, each of these bubbles on the slide represents a different aspect of the building improvements we hope will be possible through the campaign. The three primary areas we hope to address are referenced in the larger circles: the basement, Mission and Outreach Center, enhancements to our sanctuary, and other facility optimization improvements. So I'm going to run through a number of slides that show conceptually what we hope to accomplish in these areas. First, we'll talk about the basement. You may or may not be aware that we have over 7,000 square feet of basement space in this building that is largely unused and that has been underutilized for many years. This slide shows the space directly below us, I think in approximately 1955, housing what appears to be a congregational meeting or dinner. I'm not sure how many of you folks remember those days. My history with Downey does not go back that far, but I've heard stories, and I know that back in the day, the basement space was very well used. The second picture on the slide shows that same space as it looks today. It is this space that offers so much potential to us for Mission and Outreach Center that we have envisioned. The two primary considerations we needed to address before we can utilize the basement space for any purpose, and for the purpose of the Outreach Center in particular, are providing a dedicated, secure entrance to get to that space, and making sure that the space is accessible for people with mobility issues, as well as for the conveyance of equipment, supplies, etc. The committee considered options to address both of these issues. And although we originally looked at the possibility of an outdoor ramp on the Downey side of the building, we have identified what we think is a more viable option of installing what is called a limited use, limited application, or LULA, L-U-L-A, elevator. You will see the highlighted area where the elevator is shown. These elevators look and ride much like traditional elevators, but are a smaller, more affordable option for traveling minimal distances, such as in our case, just one floor up and down. As you can see from the slide, we have identified a space for installing the elevator in the hallway inside the handicapped entrance to our building. This entrance and hallway are ideal as the dedicated entrance to the basement. First, the entrance is close to the handicapped parking lot, and the hallway has an existing staircase to the basement and can be secured from the rest of the building by installing security doors both at the entrance to the narthex and at the entrance to the education wing. The yellow highlights and the red font on the slide show these changes. On this next slide, it's a floor plan of the basement, which offers a conceptual idea of how the space might be used. Please understand, this is just a concept and is not a plan set in stone. The first thing to note on this slide is the yellow highlighted space, and this is where the elevator would come down to the basement level. currently a mechanical room. The large room in the middle of the space, which was the room pictured on the earlier slide, is designated as a community room. Conceptually, this could be used for community group meetings, large gatherings, and possibly an intentional space for the food pantry distributions. Space for the food pantry storage is also depicted. The drawing is showing a dedicated space for our youth at the north end of the basement, including installing secure access doors to this space. The south end of the drawing shows the possibility of having space to house overnight guests. Mission groups, homeless families, refugees are all possibilities. That space includes the installation of emergency egress window exits, as well as ADA-compliant showers. It's probably hard to see from the slide. The drawing further depicts the installation of 2 functional ADA-compliant bathrooms, as well as space for a kitchenette and laundry facilities. Another area of focus for the campaign is reviving our worship space to prepare for our growing and diverse congregation. This first slide is a depiction of a new concept for the front of the sanctuary that is particularly exciting for me. Not only is it beautiful, but its construction would also accomplish a number of objectives. Here's another picture of how that might look. It creates an attractive focal point for worship. It provides a partition that better separates the old chancel space behind it, while also allowing the possibility of opening that space to the sanctuary on occasion through a movable center panel. It calls for removing the current screen wall and raising the projection screen for better visibility of the screen itself. Should you have my husband Craig or Kirk Friedley or Dennis Slaughter sitting in front of you, sometimes the screen is hard to see. It also offers better visibility of the chancel area to this entire side of the congregation. Lastly, in general, it opens up the chancel to new ways of using the space. This slide is an overlay to give you an additional example of how this new concept might look in our space. It does not actually show the design from the previous slide, which is a design being developed specifically for Downey, but uses a similar design that illustrates the overall effect suggested changes would have for the chancel area. There are other changes related to those being made in the sanctuary that would allow us to better utilize existing space. These are shown here. First, the current placement of our baptismal is not ideal because of its distance from the sanctuary and the congregation. Plans are to move it forward so that when it is used, it serves as an integral part of our worship experience. Second, we have a great deal of storage space in the attic that is overhead that is underutilized because it is currently only accessible via a pull-down ladder. Moving the baptistry allows us room to build a staircase to the attic, making it more practical and usable for storage of more items. And third, separating the old chancel space from the sanctuary would allow us to better use that space, perhaps as a prayer chapel, a quiet space for individuals, and possibly as a room for smaller gatherings, such as small weddings and funerals. A depiction of what that space might look like is shown on the slide. And the final improvement that we are hoping to make in our worship space is in the balcony. I see you up there. If you have ever sat up there, you may recognize this view. Most of the chancel area is not visible from the balcony due to the existing wall. We would like to rework the wall so that it incorporates a see-through panel, which essentially allows those in the balcony to see what is going on in the worship service. A view of from the front of the sanctuary shows how the new wall would look. It also shows the addition of a new, larger TV screen for those following the service from the front of the room. Further, we are proposing to separate the audiovisual section of the balcony from the seating area with the construction of a knee wall and shelving, and also to slightly reconfigure the seating arrangement. This is how it's arranged currently. But with the rearrangement, all of these improvements in the balcony would essentially add a total of 40 to 50 viable seats to the seating capacity of this sanctuary. To give you a more concrete idea of what that means, there are approximately 46 seats on this side of the sanctuary. We would be adding that many more viable seats, nearly half again as many, to our sanctuary's capacity. Finally, I want to talk about space optimization in general and one additional objective that I haven't mentioned. This slide highlights the ways that changes I have discussed would result in the optimization of our existing space. In particular, access to unused basement storage, access to storage space in the attic will allow us to repurpose those parts of our building we currently use for storage and repurpose them for more optimal uses. Last but certainly not least, one such repurposing objective, not yet mentioned, is the hope that the combined improvements we make will free up room to create a dedicated nursery in the education wing, as shown in green on the slide. Doing so will serve as an important sign to welcome young families who are seeking a church home with our congregation. Now that I have shared with you all the exciting things we hope to accomplish through the capital campaign, let me spend some time talking about the equally exciting topic of the campaign's fundraising goals. From the slides you saw, it should be evident that this project is substantial. Premature. It should be obvious that this project is substantial. For that reason, the campaign is structured as a 3-year campaign, in that the fundraising goals are predicated on financial contributions being made over a 3-year time period, 2020, 2021, and 2022. I will present the fundraising goals for the campaign in an incremental fashion, talking about what might be accomplished based on the dollar amounts that are generated. At the foundational tier, with funds of $200,000, these are the things we can do. We can accomplish what I'm calling the basement basics: access, water remediation, secure doors at points of access, and ADA-compliant bathrooms. These are the things that would be needed in the basement to use it for any purpose in the future. We could complete the work on the balcony, and additionally, we could augment the existing capital account fund for ongoing capital expenditures with a 10% dollar amount, which would be $20,000. At the Aspirational Tier, with funds of $275,000, we can accomplish the items on the Foundational Tier as well as enhance the chancel with the partition and screen walls, update and furnish the community room to make it viable for use, and further augment the capital account with an additional 10% or $7,500. At what we are calling the Inspirational Tier, with funds of $350,000, we can accomplish the items under the previous two tiers, as well as develop the food pantry space. These are in slightly different orders, but install a kitchenette, make improvements to the youth center space, relocate the baptismal and build the attic stairs, create a dedicated nursery, and again, further augment the capital account by another $7,500. And finally, at the Transformational Tier, with funds of $400,000 or more dollars, we can accomplish all of the items under the previous tiers, along with the remaining hopes of having a hospitality room, complete with safety exits and showers, installing a washer and dryer for laundry, creating a prayer chapel, and further augmenting the capital account with another $5,000 for a total of $40,000, and maybe more. We certainly have other dreams and possibilities that we could accomplish that haven't been mentioned. So it is clear, I think, that our hopes are high and that there is no doubt that these are big dollar figures. The good news is that it is doable. Using a formula based on 4 predictor models, the Church Extension Office, who has worked with many disciples' churches on capital campaigns over the years, has estimated that Downey's congregational fundraising potential would be between $250,000 and $400,000 over 3 years. That being said, still, reaching the fundraising goal will undeniably require sacrificial giving on all our parts. At the same time, our goals will also undeniably be transformational for this congregation. You will be asked to make your 3-year commitment between now and February 23rd. And note that although your pledged amounts will be given over the course of 3 years, the Board of Church Extension would be making Downey a low-interest loan based on the collective commitment amounts that would allow us to begin our work as early as this spring or summer. To make your pledges, you will be provided with a commitment card. These cards will be available soon. There will also be an online option for pledging, so stay tuned for that as well. There we are. I realize that the information I have shared is a lot to digest at once. We will make this same information available for your reference on Downey's website, and we'll continue to share more information over the coming weeks. Also, feel free to talk with me or the other folks who've been working on the project through the steering committee if you have questions or you have comments. In closing, I would like to remind you of a sermon Trey gave a few weeks ago where he talked about dreaming, and he quoted words from T.E. Lawrence that resonated with me at the time. I'd like to take the liberty of repeating them to you today. All of us dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses in their minds wake in the day to find it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day are the dangerous ones, for they may act on their dreams with open eyes to make them possible. Let's be daydreamers. Thank you. Now the ushers will come forward to receive your offering.